As the young Julian Bream was beginning to make his career as a classical guitarist in the mid-50s, he realized that it would be quite difficult to make a career playing the same repertoire as Segovia. Also, he had realized during his time at the Royal College of Music that he preferred larger, more substantive works that had more variety and quality. And I'll let him tell you about that.
Things that I'd learnt at the college, and I suppose this really was part of my tuition on the piano, was to present pieces in their entirety, like a whole Bach suite, or a whole set of preludes, or a whole set of studies. I've found that the Segovia programs, with their delicious morsels, where he'd take the smash hits from the E minor lute suite or something like that, rather unsatisfactory, because you would just be getting a lot of meringues and lollipops instead of meat and potatoes, you know. And I've always been a meat and potatoes man.
And so Bream set out to cultivate a new, modern repertoire for the classical guitar with a more progressive musical language, larger forms, and an avoidance of traditional Spanish idioms associated with the Segovia repertoire. The blueprint for a Bream commission might go something like this. Reach out to a composer you already know, or someone you're at least acquainted with, and whose work you generally admire. Ask them to write you a piece. If they say yes, make sure they are acquainted with the possibilities and the limitations of the guitar, if that's possible, and then you sit back and wait for the manuscript to come by post. After playing through the manuscript, in most cases, Bream would work closely with the composer, making sure that the piece was first playable, and second, Bream would offer suggestions on how to make things more dramatic to get them to really work on the guitar. Here's a clip of Richard Rodney Bennett speaking about collaborating with Bream on his concerto for guitar and how Bream wanted to make some changes to the cadenza.
The composer who responded to Julian's quest was Richard Rodney Bennett.
The fact that Julian, I think I can fairly say, bullied Ben and Willie Walton and Lennox into writing pieces for him, you know, because he's very determined. Said a great deal about his genius as a player. And the Britain Nocturnal is a masterpiece, and the Walton pieces are magic. And Lennox, you know, always wrote lovely music. And so I felt very honoured to be part of that, and Malcolm Arnold as well. But not that many composers of that stature wrote pieces for Julian. Julian has a very personal attitude to what you write for him. I mean, he will change things. In the concerto, in one of the cadenzas, he suddenly did an extraordinary, I know how it's spelled, but I don't know how you pronounce it, the thing where you go blah, 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 on the strings. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I felt like doing that there." And so I wasn't about to argue. You know, it was very dramatic, it was quite exciting. And a cadenza traditionally is a place where the player goes mad and does all kinds of exciting things. And I've heard the concerto played by other performers who were more intellectual, if you like, but Julian's performance of it has a sort of poetry and mystery and darkness, which nobody else has.
To sum up Bream's contribution to the guitar repertoire in the 20th century, Richard Rodney Bennett said this of Julian Bream: "Guitar music comes from the players, not just the composers. There wouldn't be a guitar repertoire if it weren't for Julian Bream." Perhaps one of the most well-documented examples of Julian Bream working with a composer on a newly commissioned piece is his collaboration with Hans Werner Henze on the first sonata of Royal Winter Music. The clip I will play now should, I think, be mandatory mandatory viewing for all serious classical guitarists. First, because it shows firsthand Bream's way of working on a new composition with a composer. He expresses doubts in the playability of certain passages, and he even strongly advocates for specific note, tempo, and expressive marking changes. What I find utterly fascinating about this clip is the subtle battle of wills that takes place just beneath the surface between Henze and Bream. Henze doesn't seem to love the idea of his notes being changed, and Bream is headstrong and persistent that the work should at least be playable and should be allowed to sound good on the guitar. Recently, I had the opportunity of working with a local Tennessee-based composer of some renown, Tim Hink is his name, on a piece a flutist and myself commissioned entitled Droid. I had a very similar experience in working with the composer to make the piece playable. And then as I rewatched this clip in preparation for this lecture, I was honestly blown away with Bream's ease in suggesting such significant changes to such a highly esteemed composer. I mean, who knows? I might even speculate that Bream's forcefulness here might be what led to some of the difficulty in commissioning the second sonata of Royal Winter Music, which, as you might know, was dedicated to Bream on the title page, but was fingered by Reinbert Evers and was never recorded by Bream. In an interview he gave for my treatise, the guitarist David Tannenbaum, who knew Henze personally and worked with Henze to prepare performances of his music, said, Bream didn't think the last movement of Royal Winter Music 2 worked for the public. He thought it was something like 22 tempo changes, and he said, I'm not going to play it or record it as written. And Henze said, okay, I'll get somebody else. And it was a rift. That was that.
More than anybody else, Bream has constantly worked to extend the repertoire.
This side. That side.
In addition to exploring the music of Elizabethan England of 400 years ago, he has inspired many contemporary composers to write new works that set out to extend the technique and the expressive possibilities of the instrument.
I've got to try for all those, because the wind, you see.
Hans Werner Henze is writing just such a work, a massive solo tour de force, over half an hour long. A sort of hammerklavier for the guitar, based on Shakespearean characters.
Oh, come on, Hans. We've got to make a game of it.
The title, Royal Winter Music, derives from Gloucester, from the beginning of Richard III, when he says, not yet being a king, now is the winter of our discontent. And after a while in his speech he talks about a lute, he says, and listens in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasing of the lute.
Now you go across there.
And I thought the sound we are now going to hear will be those lute noises transposed onto a modern guitar and to the hands and the skill of a modern guitar player. Great.
Right. Now, what is the top note of the next chord? Is it a B? It's a terrific stretch. And
It used to be a B.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I've got to do, but I'll try this now. It's good?
Yeah, it's lovely.
Not bad, is it? Now, the next chord is really just too much for me, unless I do that with my nose. Now, I tried to simplify this, Hats, and I came up with this chord.
So the top note is
A, C, G, C, E. Does that sound right?
Sounds nice.
Let's see how it works first.
I've been working on this for a month now with Julian Bream, and the piece is more or less there on paper, but it's still in the making.
You want a sort of chord because you're going to make a feature of these 2/5, aren't you?
Yes.
And you don't want
The guitar is very complicated, an instrument, and you need to learn a lot about it, which you can only do by working with the guitar player. The strings have to ring.
They do. So we've got to get a... Quite resonant. I want you to buy it, in fact.
Okay.
Now, you've got that triad there, you see, but in fact, I can't play the bass line. I can't do this, because I've got to come down the fingerboard. So, could we put that triad an octave lower, do you think?
Unless you take more time.
But you say tempo giusto there. Oh, Hans. Well, let's change it. Take time. Put it in English.
Take time.
That's it.
Liberamente.
Lovely.
What is so exciting is that very often he comes up with an idea to change something, and a month later I discover that he has come back to my original suggestion. Just the necessary...
Yes, but what you...
So he is not one of those who want you to make comfortable arrangements and to get around all kinds of new problems, but he really faces very straightforwardly the problems that present themselves to the guitar and to him. And the outcome is, I think, a very fruitful and healthy cooperation between a creative guitar player and a learning composer.
One of the things I enjoyed the most in researching the treatise was finding stories and anecdotes about how Bream was during the commissioning process. There are many stories and anecdotes concerning the lakes Bream went to, the various wheelings and dealings surrounding the commissioning of many of these pieces. Perhaps one of the best and possibly well-known stories is the almost decade it took Bream to convince Benjamin Britten to compose the Nocturnal after John Dowland. And since Bream tells the story so well in the My Life in Music DVD, I'm going to let him do it for himself in just a second. But two other little short stories that I came across, and some of you may know these, might know both of them easily, but that were very interesting to me were, first of all, Bream, and this is not allegedly, Bream says this in A Life on the Road, dictated to Tony Palmer. Bream offered Malcolm Arnold £50 to write the guitar concerto. An offer that Malcolm Arnold took. And now we have the Malcolm Arnold Guitar Concerto. £50. That's incredible. The second one, I know you all know this, is that Bream supposedly waited in the lobby of Igor Stravinsky's hotel in order to persuade him to compose a piece for the lute. The outcome of this meeting, this eventual meeting, because it didn't take place in the lobby of the hotel, but the outcome of this meeting is recorded in one of the classical guitar's most incredible and cringe-worthy encounters. And I'm not going to play this clip now, I'm saving it for the end because it deserves to be played at the end. In any case, here is the clip of Bream talking about the commissioning process of the Nocturnal.
Ben and his dog, we used to go for quite long walks, and it was absolutely fascinating because we used to talk about music all the time. And he was often talking about sonata form. And I could tell he was trying to think how he was going to write something for me. And he was telling me about the problems today of writing sonatas. And he felt that the last great sonatas were written by Debussy, for example, which were the last pieces of music he ever wrote. And his feeling was that when you use an old form, you've got to rethink it. And he somehow felt he wasn't in the frame of mind at that point to rethink sonata form. And so we were talking about many other things too, and I was all the time trying to steer him off the lute, you see. This was the great problem, because at that time there were only about 1.5 lute players in England, you know, and there would have been very little call for a gigantic sort of sonata by Benjamin Britten for the lute. And so I was always edging him off this, you know. But anyway, nothing came of it. Well, there was no piece, nothing, he never mentioned anything to me. And then I gave a concert, and I played the famous Omenaje by Manu de Falla, which was written to the memory of Claude Debussy. And at the end of the concert, Britain rushed round. He said, "Julian, that fire piece," he said, "that's the most magnificent piece." He said, "Do you know, it probably only lasts 4 or 5 minutes, but there was 20 minutes of music in that piece." He said, "It's a fantastic piece." And so he went off.
My treatise was among the first attempts made to make something of a definitive list of the pieces written for Julian Bream. In compiling this list, I chose to cut a few pieces. Because of this, I had to devise a rationale for whether or not to include a piece in the list. The rationale was as follows. Here are the pieces that I chose to include. Any piece whose title page bears a dedication to Bream. Any instance where we know from a first-hand source that the piece was composed for Bream. And pieces in which Bream was an active part of the compositional process. Now, if you know a lot of information about what's on the title pages to many of these pieces, you may have a couple questions about works I included. I urge you to read the treatise because one by one I do explain each. And in the Q&A, I'd be happy to talk about this if anyone has any questions about why or why not a piece was or was not included. In any case, here is the full list of pieces that my treatise contains. By Reginald Smith Brendel, we have the Nocturne of 1946, El Polifemo de Oro of 1956, variants on 2 themes of J.S. Bach. We have the Berkeley Sonatina. We have Henze Drei Tientos, Royal Winter Music, First Sonata only. We have Variations Opus 59 by Dennis Apivor. We have the Britten Nocturnal after John Dowland, Opus 70. Richard Rodney Bennett, 5 Impromptus, and the Bennett Sonata. We have the Thomas Eastwood Ballade Fantasy, Fricker, Paseo, Opus 61, Malcolm Arnold, Fantasy for Guitar, Opus 107, the 5 Bagatelles of William Walton. We have 5 by Humphrey Cyril. We have the Rawsthorne Elegy, Solo, Opus 42 by Giles Swain. Maxwell Davies, Hill Runes, Michael Barkley, Sonata in 1 Movement, Michael Tippett, The Blue Guitar, Toru Takemitsu, 5 Impromptus, and Mere Woods from In the Woods, and the Sonata by Leo Brouwer. Now, there are some pieces that folks might think were written for Bream that aren't included here, that I chose not to include. The guitar works of Terry Usher, the Impromptu, 2 Minuets, Suite for Guitar, Sonata in A Major, Chansonzina, and Arabesque Opus 6 are not included in this treatise. Why? Because they were written at the behest of Henry Bream, who was Julian's father, and the pieces represent some of the juvenilia of the Bream repertoire and are not stylistically congruous with the larger repertoire. Another work that is often thought of as a Bream piece is Tristram Carey's Sonata for Guitar Alone. Many guitarists believe this piece was written for Bream, but the score does not include a dedication, and it was edited by John Duarte, so I didn't include it. Also, Bream neither recorded the piece, nor is there any mention of the piece in either A Life on the Road or Graham Wade's The Art of Julian Bream. Possibly controversially, I chose not to include Henze's Royal Winter Music, Sonata No. 2. And this is because of the rift that I described earlier. It was because of Bream's aforementioned lack of enthusiasm for the project. And I have also not included any of the ongoing commissions by the Julian Bream Trust. Okay? Now, I have a little mea culpa here, because I finished this treatise in 2015, and in the 5 years since I finished the treatise, I have discovered a few works that were most certainly written for Bream, of which I was not aware at the time. Most of these pieces fall early on in his career and may not have been included in the paper anyway, but for the sake of total transparency here, and for just discussion after this is over, I'd like to let you guys know what a couple of those pieces are. They are Ries de Hilser's Prelude of 1946, the Duarte Meditation on a Ground Bass, Opus 5 of 1949, and Stephen Dodgson's Prelude, Nocturne, and Toccata of 1953. Those are pieces that I now believe should have been included and were not. Mea culpa. And onward we move. Okay, so of the 22 odd works that make my full list, I would say that 6 of the works have entered the standard canon of classical guitar performance. Now, one could argue that, let's say, the Rawsthorne Elegy has received more performances in the last few years, or that the Bennett Impromptus are widely beloved by students performing their first 12-tone work, or even that El Polifemo de Oro by Reginald Smith Brendel deserves to be dubbed canonical, but I think it is safe to say that these 6 works I've listed are the most widely represented on recordings and on the concert platform. These works are the Sonatina by Lennox Barkley, Dreitientos and Royal Winter Music 1 by Hans Werner Henze, the Walton Bagatelles, the Britten Nocturnal, Takamitsu, All in Twilight and Mere Woods, and the Brouwer Sonata. So those are the works we all know. One of the really great joys in working on this project was discovering new works in the Bream repertoire which I was not previously familiar. And sort of to close, not to close because this is going to take a bit, but I have chosen 3 of the lesser-known gems to explore for this lecture. I will walk you through each piece in the same level of detail that it is provided in my treatise, so that you'll be able to judge if the treatise is personally useful to you. The 3 pieces I've chosen, for the sake of brevity, and just because I enjoy these 3 pieces, are Dennis Apovor's Variations, Opus 29. I wonder if any of you had heard of that piece before I just said it. Hill Runes by Peter Maxwell Davies, and The Ballade Fantasy by Tom Eastwood. Okay, so let's get started with the Apovor Variations. So Dennis Apovor was one of the first British composers to adopt the use of serial techniques along with Humphrey Searle. Although many of his earliest works were written in this style, he later became disillusioned with serialism and simplified his style. He is best remembered for his 22 compositions for the guitar and his text, An Introduction to Serial Composition for Guitarists, which would prove useful if you were wanting to write this type of music for the guitar. Julian Bream premiered his very first guitar work, Concertino Opus 26, and then subsequently commissioned Variations Opus 29 soon after in 1959. Unfortunately, it's doubtful that Bream ever performed the piece, as he left the editing and premiere to another guitarist. At the time of the composition of this piece, Apovor was taking beginning guitar lessons with John Roberts, a prominent teacher in the area. Apovor was immersed in the technical studies of Sor, Tarrega, Carcassi, we all know these, and the idea behind the Variations Opus 29 seems to have been to combine these specific technical challenges from the etudes with a serial musical language. The primary scholar on Apovor's guitar works is a gentleman named Mark Merrington. He wrote an article called Dennis Apovor and the Classical Guitar, which was published in the fall 2006 Guitar Review magazine. He describes each variation as follows. These 9 short pieces provided an ideal opportunity for the composer to explore the possibilities of the instrument in a solo context, particularly from the point of view of its contrapuntal capacity. The second variation is a tremolo study, whose influence is most likely to have been Tarrega's Recuerdos de la Alhambra. while the third and eighth are clearly intended to evoke the rhythmic character of the various transcribed dances of Albanese and Granados. The arpeggio-based textures of the fourth and fifth variations are quite obviously modeled on the studies and light pieces of such 19th century guitar virtuosi as Sohr and Giuliani. In the sixth and seventh variations, Apivour appears to be essaying Baroque style. The former, in its contrapuntal density, which is reminiscent of the guitar transcriptions of lute music by Bach, and the latter, in its dotted rhythms and fantasia-like character. Only the first and final pieces are more abstract and less obviously related to any particular model. I will now play a short excerpt of this piece performed by Simon James. Now, this is the only performance of this piece that I know to exist. I found it on YouTube. I've never heard another one or heard of another one. As it's playing, or possibly as the slide is started right now, I have the first measure for these variations written. And what I want you to do is look for, if you like these type things, look for the entire prime tone row represented in its entirety within the first measure. So, in summation, I find Apivour's variations to be a fun, suitable introduction to the 12-tone style for the intermediate guitarist. Also, there is certainly nothing else like it in the repertoire. The score is published by Schott. It is quite difficult to procure in the United States. To my knowledge, there is no commercially distributed recording of this piece. So if you're a young, opportunistic, and enterprising guitarist looking to make a 20th century guitar CD, this may be an opportunity for you. Okay, let's move on to Hill Runes by Peter Maxwell Davies. So, Peter Maxwell Davies was among the most successful British composers of the 20th and 21st centuries. While a student, he was highly influenced by the music of Harrison Birtwistle and Alexander Goer. However, up through his final compositions, he remained a composer untethered by any compositional system or dogma. His language was his own, sometimes described as a juxtaposition of the avant-garde serial influence of his teachers and several unique local influences. He received commissions from orchestras and artists the world over and was knighted by the Queen in 1987. Hill Runes, written in 1981, marks the most auspicious piece that Davies wrote for Bream. It was commissioned by the Dartington Festival and was premiered there in the summer of 1981. Davies is known to have drawn inspiration from the piece from the mythology of the island of, I believe it's Orkney, an island off the Scottish coast, a place he held a special fondness for, and he also wanted to rid his guitar piece of any traditional Spanish idiom. Bream found the piece tremendously difficult to play and was especially concerned with his ability to cleanly execute all of the trills in the piece. This is funny. Given the high humidity levels at Dartington that summer, Bream really thought that because his fingers were soft from humidity that the trills were just going to be impossible. Bream had been aware of how difficult Davies' music might prove at the guitar, but he agreed to play the piece anyway. He said, "I've known Max for 20 years now. Somehow I've never felt his musical language would fit naturally onto the guitar. But having heard some of Max's more recent works, I felt he was in a musical period of his life when he was writing music that might be suitable and indeed even work well on the guitar." Hill Runes contains some of the most challenging and dense music in the entire Bream repertoire, maybe in the entire repertoire, and is often divisive among performers. Many adore the piece, and others find it impossible to understand. For instance, I conducted several interviews for my treatise, and when I interviewed Elliot Fisk, he said of this piece, "I find Hill Runes to be totally inscrutable. I cannot penetrate that piece at all." David Tannenbaum said, "Hill Runes is a terrific piece." So there you go. It's a very, you either like it or you really don't like it. Hill Runes is composed in 5 linked sections. The main scholar on the piece is David Harvey, and he described the piece in an article for Tempo magazine as such. The basic plan is of alternately fast and slow movements, the adagio of the first movement serving as an introduction to the more substantial allegro moderato, and the varying tempo of 2 tending towards slower rather than faster music. The third and fourth movements act as foils to the larger and more complex structures of movements 1 and 5 and the instability of 2. And the vivace through a pattern of rhythm, progressively more regular meter, and a transparent sectional form using restatements of the opening theme with octave displacements. And in the adagio molto through a passacaglia construction, an 8-bar theme in 2 contrapuntal voices elaborated by the successive addition of parts, firstly a bass, then a treble. Between these statements comes first a codetta, then an interlude which suggests a more traditional passacaglia genre in the descending fourth A, G, F, E, prominent in the lowest part, and perhaps provides another memory of Spain. Elements of the interlude are combined with the codetta music to conclude the movement. So I have to say, I have not played this piece. I did read through the piece extensively when writing the treatise several years ago, and I can say that playing Hill Runes is not for the faint of heart. It has technical challenges in nearly every bar, and what's more is they aren't the standard scales, tremolo, arpeggios, stuff like that. The challenges are like nearly unplayable chords, really large stretches, bursts of extreme velocity, simultaneous harmonics, not to mention that a good deal of the piece is written in a low register that is really difficult to keep clear. Like a lot of it is is all on the three bass strings, so you have to sort of keep things clear and avoid, scratchy bass noise. So it's a real challenge. There are many reasons to avoid this piece, but I think it is certainly the only piece for guitar that has that unmistakable Davies sound. It's been recorded a few times, including a recording by Bream himself, but I think the time could be ripe for a young player with a new level of virtuosity to come along and reveal the mysteries of this piece. I'm now going to play an excerpt of Bream performing some of Hill. This is the part in an in-person lecture where I would have a show of hands and ask what you all thought of Hill Runes, but I can't do that. So we'll move on to the Eastwood Ballade Fantasy. So Tom Eastwood was a British diplomat who served on the British Council and was stationed in Ankara, Turkey. While he was stationed in Turkey, he took up composition, studying with prominent teacher Nestle Kazimakis. I probably said that wrong. Eastwood later continued his studies with Boris Blocher in Berlin and Edward Stein in London. Although I believe Eastwood treated composition as a pastime to his diplomatic work, a string trio of his was awarded a top prize at the Cheltenham Open Festival competition, and he completed a chamber opera, The Taming of the Shrew. So he was also quite an accomplished composer. Although Tom Eastwood composed the three solo guitar works Amphora, Romance and Plainte, and Ballade Fantasy, and the chamber work for guitar and flute or oboe entitled Wirapuru, none of his works for the instrument have found a place in the instrument's core repertoire. In The Art of Julian Bream, Graham Wade's only note concerning Ballade Fantasy is that the piece is reflective and challenging and was premiered by Bream at Queen Elizabeth Hall on the 30th of March 1969 and has been neglected by recitalists. As the title suggests, the Ballade Fantasy of 1969 is written in two movements. The ballade begins with a slow, plaintive melody, marked reflective and mysterious. It's in A Phrygian. The movement gives the air of being an improvisation, and most of the harmonic tension is derived from the use of appoggiatura. The piece is harmonically challenging but tonal, with most sections generally centered around E and A, so it sounds good on the guitar. Like the ballade, the second movement, Fantasy, uses a recurring melodic motive to unify the different sections of the piece. Instead of the appoggiatura of the ballade, here Eastwood uses the tritone. It appears unadorned in the opening measures in the bass. Formally, the fantasy is constructed in 3 sections: an intense introduction that presents the tritone motive, an improvisatory middle section marked meno mosso that features repeated note figurations, and a 3rd section marked con moto that employs an ostinato bass melody in A minor. The piece ends with a brief coda where the material from the introduction featuring the tritone returns. So it's wrapped up neatly at the end. To be honest, I'm unsure as to why the ballade fantasy hasn't found a place in the repertoire. It's tonal, it's well written and edited, there's nothing that's really unplayable, and I find the piece accessible to a general audience. I think perhaps the main reason for its lack of performances is a specifically challenging repeated note section in the fantasy. The section lasts for about 25 measures, and it has to be played with alternating strokes from the index and middle finger, and due to the irregular placement of bass notes, it cannot be played with a 3-finger or tremolo pattern without losing the ability to accent the bass notes. So basically, it's this pattern that should be easy, but because of where the accents lie, you have to use a very bizarre right-hand fingering, and it's very difficult, and it goes on for a long time. So it requires a Herculean level of endurance that would be difficult to perform with consistency. Bream never recorded the piece. This is one of those instances, though, where we don't know how lucky we are, and that there is a tremendous recording of this piece. If you're interested in hearing it, the Uruguayan guitarist Marco Sartor on his album Red has a great recording, which we're going to listen to a little bit of here in just a second. I actually interviewed Marco for this project, and he gave me some great advice on learning this piece, and just advice for guitarists in general on learning this piece. He said, do it. It deserves to be played more. You should, of course, carefully follow the dynamics, the rhythms, and all other indications. Think of its most effective place within the program, perhaps in the middle of more traditional and upbeat works, because it starts and finishes with an introverted character. Thanks, Marco. So here are 2 excerpts from Eastwood's Ballade Fantasy, the first from the Ballade and the second from the Fantasy. Okay, so why read my treatise? You probably have lots of other things to do. Why would you want to read a treatise on works written for Julian Bream? First of all, it's a great starting point for research into any of the Bream repertoire. I mean, I present the most widely agreed upon research for each piece as a starting point, and I add my own expert opinion. It has a performer's guide for each piece. What is the difficulty level? What are the specific technical difficulties? And to give you a pretty good idea of how long it might take to work the piece into your repertoire. I have recommended recordings of each piece. And I also let you know if the piece has been recorded or not, in case you're just out there looking for something really untouched, you know? It's a good way to find new repertoire. If you know you enjoy the canonical works, but you haven't heard any of these other works, you're not familiar with them, it's a good way to find more about them. Beyond that, I interviewed lots of people, and in the appendices in the back, I transcribed all those interviews. So there's some really wonderful little gems back there. Just to name a few, I interviewed David Starobin, Angelo Gilardino, David Tannenbaum, Elliot Fisk, Marco Sartor, many others. And these interviews have a wealth of opinions about Bream, modern guitar music. It has Elliot Fisk's interpretation of what the nocturnal means. I'm serious, go check it out. It has David Tannenbaum's wonderful stories and anecdotes about Toru Takemitsu and Michael Tippett. So really, give it a shot. Okay, so my bibliography. Here are the 5 works on Bream that I probably cited the most, and I think if you have interest in this repertoire, these are just things you should have. First, you should have Tony Palmer's A Life on the Road. This is a secondhand copy. This is hard to get new now, but you can get it secondhand. I cannot recommend a book on Julian Bream more than this book. The second is the Paul Ballmer produced DVD, Julian Bream, My Life in Music. If it's still out there, that's one to go and get. Wonderful. This brick, the complete RCA album collection, it was reasonably inexpensive a couple years ago, but I've seen people scalping it on Amazon.com for ridiculous amounts of money lately. But it might still be out there for a reasonable amount of money. Something else is The Art of Julian Bream by Graham Wade. This has lots of programs, excellent pictures of Bream, album covers. It's very beautiful to look at if you're interested in memorabilia. And it's also got lots of good information too. And then maybe the last thing, if you're really interested in all things Bream, check out Stuart Button's Julian Bream, The Foundations of a Musical Career. It really details his early life and his relationship with his father, Henry Bream. So, there's my bibliography. Move these things back over here. All right. That's it. So I'd like to thank you all for listening. I'd like to thank everyone at GFA for having me. And I would like to thank Julian Bream most of all for working so tirelessly to commission such wonderful music for us all to play. So if by some miracle he's out there listening to this, thank you so much, Julian. We all owe you. I'd like to thank all of the folks I interviewed, especially Elliot Fisk and David Tannenbaum, who I quoted quite liberally today. I would like to thank my doctoral committee, especially Jane Piper Clendenning and Bruce Holtzman. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, I'd like to thank my wife Kristen, who was tremendously helpful during the writing of the treatise itself and the making of this video under quarantine, and my 2.5-year-old daughter Nora, who managed to stay mostly quiet while I filmed this video. Thanks again, and once again, there should be a slide showing my contact stuff again, and I will leave you with a clip of Julian Bream playing the lute for Igor Stravinsky. Have a good rest of your time at GFA.
Maestro, I wanted to meet you so much. We were at Dartington. I was there when you were there.
Yeah.
That was right.
Yeah.
And we never met, actually.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to very much.
Yeah.
How are you? Are you enjoying your time?
I am fine.
You are, and you're working very hard and recording away.
All my life.
Yes.
Julian Bream is the world's best player of the lute.
I always wanted to play to you sometime.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. My name is Federico Mascro. Welcome to the live Q&A with Dr. Michael McCallie. Thank you, Michael, for joining us, for sharing your knowledge with us, and we all just watched your extremely informative lecture. So welcome.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. And I do want to say one thing quickly before we get started, because there was a clip at the end that we cut just because my lecture was a little bit long, and the clip was Julian Bream bringing his lute to Igor Stravinsky in between a recording session to try and get him to enjoy the sound of the lute in case Stravinsky might want to compose a piece for the guitar lute. If you haven't seen it, Google it. It's one of the most cringy videos you'll ever see of any classical guitar player, but I think it's very informative in that it shows the lengths that Bream was willing to go to get this new music for us, and for that we owe him a great deal of gratitude. And anyway, welcome all. I'm ready for your questions.
All right, before we start, for those of you watching the live stream, make sure you can register on the GFA website, guitarfoundation.org, or you can look for the link so you can join us here on Zoom and send us your questions. So don't be shy. Join us right now so you can send us your questions. We do have a time limit of around 15 minutes, but we'll do our best to get through all the questions. Michael, shall we?
Yes.
All right, before we start, could you tell us what inspired your research? Why did you pick this topic? Was it Bream? Was it the compositions?
Well, a little bit of both, but I think really anytime you're in school, and you know that you're going to have to spend this tremendous amount of time working for a final project, I found that it just should be something you love. And I knew more than anything that I loved Bream's playing. I loved this repertoire. I knew that it was music I could stand to spend a year or more of my life in. And also, I was kind of shocked that no one had even compiled a list of what the pieces all were. We all know the kind of greatest hits, but there are so many more pieces, and so I just thought it needed to be out there.
That's correct. We have a question from Chuck here. How much of the success of the Bream repertoire do you feel is directly tied to his unique, colorful interpretations? Much of the extreme color has fallen out of favor, and often he thinks, Chuck, that the pieces fall flat without his sound. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that was something I thought a whole lot about, and especially in the video when you watch him work with the composers, you think his way of playing influenced how the pieces was written. You can watch in that clip with Henze. Bream is just like, here's how I would play it, here's the way I, interface with the guitar. I do think that Bream's way of playing brings those pieces alive. I have, however, heard wonderful performances by other players. I do think that the reason some of the pieces have really found an audience, the ones that I claimed or said were canonical works, are mostly because Bream played them. Bream championed them. I think they resonated with him. I think that the ones that weren't played as much, or that we don't know about, isn't necessarily because they're not as good. It's because they just didn't resonate with Bream. He didn't perform them, and they just never found an audience. The Bream repertoire really needed Bream out there being this advocate for it. So I hope that answers your question, Chuck.
Well, he's still here, so he can send us another question. And as a performer and as a teacher, what do you feel about this compositions? Because they are quite different, the ones you described in the lecture. Do you have a favorite? As a teacher, do you think students should play any of them, a specific one? Any thoughts on that?
Well, so when I have a student who has played all the basic repertoire and really has an ear for exploration, maybe a student who wants to experiment playing 12-tone music. It does happen. Mm-hmm. And I think I said this in the lecture, the go-to is almost always, first of all, the 5 impromptus of Richard Rodney Bennett, or second, it's the what's the other piece I'm thinking of? Oh, El Polifemo de Oro by Reginald Smith Brendel. Those are the two entry pieces. And I really think that Apivore piece, I'll be as honest as I can, I don't think it's a masterpiece. But I think what's novel about it is that can you imagine playing a piece that's written in the serial style, but that blends Carcassi and Tarrega and all of the technical stuff? And there's this recording that exists on YouTube, but it's a workable recording. Like, I would love for that piece to have a commercially produced recording, because I really think that piece could get some play. I think that the Eastwood Fantasy Ballade, for me, I've got to give credit to Marco Sartor. He plays it so well. He sells the piece so well that maybe you'd heard it before and thought, I don't know if this piece works, but that all the piece needs is that one performance. We see new repertoire work like this all the time. You hear some new player take a piece we didn't know we loved. Maybe it's in a competition, maybe it's in a YouTube video we've all seen, and then you can watch it a couple, months later, 2 or 3 more people are playing it. And so I think if a person took up one of these obscure pieces from the Bream repertoire, we could really start hearing more of those other pieces.
All right. We have another question. Do you have any hot leads on how to get the Apivore, the Scott version?
Send me an email.
Okay. So for those of you that watched the lecture, at the end of the lecture, we had his information. If you could share your email here again as well.
I'll tell you guys what it is again.
Fantastic.
It is MMCCALLIE at MCCALLIE.org. McCallie at McCallie.org. If you send me an email, I really don't mind sending that one, because I don't think you can get it. The only way I found it was the scholar Mark Merrington sent it to me. And I have not seen a place to be able to purchase it. So send me an email.
And this is related. The RCA box is listed on Amazon for over $1,000 right now. So now that you mentioned,
bummer.
I know, right? But you can still get it if you want.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I knew when it came out, because it came out right when I was starting to write this paper, and it was expensive then, and I thought, because I had seen it happen with a bunch of other box sets. They print exactly this certain number, and once they're gone, they're gone, and people start scalping them, and that's happened with that box set. And then also the complete John Williams is like that now too. So hopefully they put it back out someday.
So talking about recordings, you mentioned that you have a few favorites that you would like to recommend. But what are the ones that we're missing that you wish we had recordings for all of these pieces that you mentioned?
I wish. Let me look at my list. Like, which ones do I wish we had recordings of? I think that there are some of the Reginald Smith Brendel pieces besides El Polifemo de Oro. He wrote quite a few pieces for guitar, and they don't really get recorded very much. The Malcolm Arnold Fantasy is a great piece of music that almost never gets recorded. You hear the Blue Guitar by Michael Tippett, but not as often as you should. I think the one really that people should look into, and this might be a controversial pick if you listen to it, is Humphrey Cyril's 5. It's a really, really dissonant, atonal technique fest. It is so difficult to play. But it's a great piece, and I think if some super virtuoso player put it in their repertoire, people would start playing it. I think that's the one that's waiting for someone to really knock it out of the park is 5 by Humphrey Cyril.
Now, when you were doing your research, first, how long long did it take you to gather all this information? Because you mentioned this was 5 years ago, and then you completed your work, right?
Well, so I started working on it in maybe 2000, like just the beginnings of getting the idea and starting to find out if it was doable, and to make sure that someone hadn't already done it.
Yes.
In 2013, and then I finished it in 2015. So it was a pretty solid 2 years of work. And I will say, for anyone who goes, because it's free, you can go to the Florida State University research website and download it for free. The real point of the paper isn't me trying to say that I'm the prime scholar on all these pieces. It's just me giving you a doorway into where to get started on all of them. It just offers all of the introductory material that you need to say, hey, I like these. I think I've heard this one, and but I've never heard it recorded. Like, what's it even like? How hard is it? Where can I find a recording? What is the scholarship on it? I just wanted to provide that for us because I feel like I would have liked to have had that.
And through your research, did your opinion change on any of those companies?
Thank you, Michael, for that fantastic lecture on this repertoire that we love so much. And thank you, Federico, for hosting that conversation. That will continue in the Zoom room. So if you were enjoying it, just stay in that Zoom room and you can keep hearing the answers to those questions. But in the interest of time, we're going to jump on over to our next lecture by Jim McCutcheon. This will conclude our afternoon stream. Lecture by Jim McCutcheon, followed by his live Q&A, and then we'll be jumping right into the first group of competitors for the International Concert Artist Competition. Enjoy.
Opportunity is missed by most people because it is dressed in overalls and looks like work. There is room in every profession for someone who is willing to work hard to put themselves ahead of the pack. You never want to drive a really nice car, do you? You'll never make a living with classical guitar. One of my biggest regrets is having told a young Jim McCutcheon that he'd never make a living at classical guitar. God help the students who actually took my advice. Hi everyone, I'm Jim McCutcheon, and I have been for 68 years. A few words about myself. 50 years ago in the Midwest, there were very, very few teachers who knew much about classical guitar, even the simplest things, like how to hold it, or good left hand position. I started playing the guitar at age 11 and had 7 years of lessons where I learned every possible variation of poor technique. Heading to college, I became a physics major because I was too afraid to become a music major. And midway through that, I had a great opportunity. A touring guitarist named Bunyan Webb was coming through town and giving a free master class. I always remember what he said to me at my first lesson when I told him of my 4-year plateau. Jim, you only have 2 problems. Your left hand and your right hand. After 2 years spent learning how to play the guitar all over again and taking 1 lesson a year with him as he came through the Midwest on tour, I told him I was considering a career as a guitarist. Without skipping a beat, he said, "You don't plan on getting rich, do you?" I've been called a survivor by many people in our industry, and I take that as a compliment. That struggle, that incredible challenge, and wonderful roller coaster ride is what I'm here to talk to you about today. As I go through this presentation, I encourage you to jot down questions because there will be 40+ years of experience crammed into 40+ minutes here. That's a lot of information. There will be time at the end for you to ask questions. After completing my physics degree and touring with a combo as a jazz flutist for 18 months, I turned down the medical school acceptance that I had received and re-entered music school, where it took me 3 more years to earn another bachelor's degree in guitar performance. Certainly not the normal prescribed academic route, but at least I was following my heart. I then entered the workforce, which at that time had openings for part-time college teachers, and I began piecing together a living from multiple income sources. A word about public school music teaching options. I never had a strong desire to be a public school music teacher, but it's really not a bad way to go, and it's a great way to spend 9 months a year making music every weekday with kids and developing methods and guitar programs while making a steady living, creating a decent retirement, and having 3 months a year off to do what you want. If you want to explore this career possibility, talk with somebody who's been through it, like Albert Coons, who edits the CD review column in Soundboard. The remainder of this talk is centered on the musician who will be carving out a living as an independent entity, and there are many ways this can happen. One other point I'd like to make here at the beginning is that there are many paths your life can take. Some of my peers have spouses that are only too happy to support their artistic habits. I'm aiming this talk at those of you who are going to make it on your own, and to do that, as in doing most things in life, you need to cultivate skills which on the surface might seem to have nothing to do with the beauty and the meaning of the music you're making, but which are essential in giving yourself the opportunity to continually make that music better throughout your entire lifetime. I know many guitarists come into this profession with the hopes of becoming full-time concert artists. This is very similar to kids who play Little League Baseball and dream of making it in the majors. As we know all too well, only a very small percentage will do that, and it's the same in music. Most of those who make it to the minor as well as the major leagues also use teaching as a fairly stable source of income compared to playing concerts and gigs. Private teaching is really not a bad alternative when it comes to making a living, especially if you enjoy it and see yourself giving back the way your teachers have given to you. If you are fresh out of college and beginning to build a name for yourself, look for ways that will make your teaching more interesting to potential students and their parents. We call this building your brand. For independent business people of all ilks, a little soul searching will help a great deal. Ask yourself these questions. Who are you as a person? What's really important to you? What will make you happy? Who are you as a musician? What styles can you perform well? What's your repertoire? Here's a big one. Do you sing while you play? I estimate that only about 35% of guitarists actively sing while they play, and this is the reason I'm a musician today. If you do, this will increase your chances of landing employment with bands. That's what happened to me. It also increases your chances of being a successful teacher, both privately, because kids want to sing songs from the popular repertoire, like Ed Sheeran or Bruno Mars, which is not Bach or Dowland, but also at colleges, where a lot of guitar teaching is aimed at future music educators who will be teaching classroom guitar, as well as music therapists who definitely won't be playing the chaconne, but they are going to be using their guitars as they sing with their clients. So who are you as a teacher? What styles are you able to teach competently? Classical guitar technique serves every style well, but do you have experience playing and teaching rock, jazz, fingerstyle? How about banjo and or mandolin? The more experience you have, the more employable you will become because you can work with more students, and the more interesting your daily teaching routine will be. Finally, what age students can you work well with? Do you have methods to teach little ones, senior citizens, Do you have a clue what will motivate them to practice and learn to play this challenging instrument which they probably thought would be easy? If you balance your specialty and your diversity, you can work toward teaching what you like teaching best. So the next question is, where are you going to do this private teaching? First of all, get as much experience as you possibly can. Some stores and all colleges expect you to have experience teaching. If you can teach at home, do it, but be sure to check with your homeowners or renter's insurance in case somebody trips and falls. Teach at music stores or private lesson studios. There's a lot you can learn from all these, which you may use later. These places find you students, hopefully give you a nice place to teach, and for that you pay a fee. These fees can vary widely, so shop around for the best deal in your area. You'll probably have to interview for this job. And as with any interview, be sure to prepare. We're all used to auditions. Be sure you know as much as possible about the place you are seeking employment. And be prepared to speak clearly and confidently about the skills you are bringing, including information about methods you would use for students of all ages. You might even be asked to play something. That's the easy part if you have a variety of music prepared to showcase. Be on time for that audition. Dress appropriately, because to get the best jobs, you need to be prepared and impressive. Lesson programs exist at area public and private schools, and you don't necessarily need a teaching certificate to teach there in that capacity. There are also companies that place private lesson teachers in schools which have no music programs, such as STEM schools, preschools, churches, libraries, and you can find students that way. But again, be sure to be clear about your insurance liabilities. There are lessons.com type businesses. That's another way to get experience. Develop your online teaching chops. Learn about lighting, camera angle, ways to effectively demonstrate concepts into the camera. Learn as much as you can about all these methods of marketing and delivery of the services that you now provide. Always think of this question. What is it about your teaching that makes you special? Why should someone choose you over the next guy who might be less expensive? Do you offer your students recitals? Do you play recitals? What other public performances can you offer your students that perhaps the guitar teacher down the street does not? Like public radio, libraries, churches, Facebook Live, fundraising events. The possibilities are endless. Learn about reward systems that provide incentives to students above and beyond the weekly lesson. One which I found particularly effective is the National Federation of Music Clubs annual festivals. NFMC is the largest musical organization in the USA. Once a year, students perform from a graded repertoire list for judges, who are your qualified peers in your region, and get feedback which usually reinforces what you are teaching them. Students receive a rating and points to earn gold cups or trophies and certificates, which are actually very motivational for young students. What is particularly effective for me is that having my students participating at festival shows potential students and their families that I'm confident to have them judged by my peers, and also that I'm capable of directing their studies in a long-term, positive, and organized direction. One generally does not find this with your typical music store guitar teacher who comes into the lesson and says, "Okay, Johnny, what would you like to learn today?" Parents like that, especially parents who are educated and realize the value of long-term planning, and those are often the ones that can afford to pay a little more for experiences for their children. More information on NFMC can be found at my website, and I have a video of a typical festival on my YouTube channel. College teaching is a very nice way to spend a career. Full-time, tenure-track positions exist, but when a position is announced and you apply, expect that your application will be in a stack of 150 of them, half of whom have doctorates, and most of whom have experience teaching. This usually takes monumental perseverance. Read Sean Beaver's blog about how he finally landed one of these plums. Part-time college teaching positions are more available, and they come with some benefits. Namely, you get to say you're teaching at a college. That's about where the benefits end. Forget about health care, much retirement, or job security. Forget about raises. After 5 years of teaching at a community college, I asked my department chairman if I could have an hourly rate increase because back in the 1980s, when there was double-digit inflation, most of you don't know what that is, I was actually making 30% less than when I had started. He leaned back in his chair, pulled out a file folder over an inch thick, slapped it down on the desk, and asked me if I would like to see how many people wanted my job. Not nice. Also, with the Affordable Care Act, forget about earning a substantial part of your living, even if you build up the numbers of students you are teaching, because most colleges limit their part-time teachers to about 9 to 12 teaching hours a week, so they won't be legally responsible for paying you benefits. There are exceptions to this, and a few part-timers have worked their way into tenure-track positions with varying results. Go for an advanced degree. Many adjuncts have doctorates. Advantages of part-time teaching at colleges are that you can have as much outside employment as you want to, and you don't have to go to committee meetings. But at least if you are teaching at a college, you can build your private studio on that status. It's one thing among several that can distinguish you from everybody else who is doing what you're doing. It's that way with business in general also. What is it about what you do that makes it special, and therefore desirable for someone to establish a business relationship with you? I initially taught lessons in my home, as well as at a music store. For the first year, I learned more than my students did. Can anyone out there relate? My wife was not a big fan of having students in our house for lessons. So when the duplex next to us came up for sale, we purchased it with a down payment that we had saved. We were able to rent the upstairs apartment and cover the mortgage, and I took the downstairs apartment and started teaching there. Not as convenient for me, but it was very good for family harmony. I was getting more calls to teach than I had time for, so I invited a former college student of mine, now graduated and teaching elsewhere, to come and teach the overflow. This turned into our pilot project, and I thought I had made it as a musician. I did not have to teach on Saturdays. I traded a few lessons with a commercial artist and got this logo. You might know where that came from. I said, "John, I don't really play the lute that much." He said, "Jim, you're not an angel either." After 2 years of this pilot project, we moved to the suburbs in 1988, quadrupling our home mortgage payment. After I gave one guitar lesson in our new house, my wife said, "Oh, I saw this property in the downtown area of our suburb that would make a perfect music studio." I took the hint. It was a house that had several rooms and a detached garage. I'm thinking, drummers can go here. And we were able to assemble another down payment. Remember my definition of making it as a musician, not teaching on Saturdays? That changed immediately because now I needed to cover that mortgage. But we had a building which was half full of other businesses, a hairdresser, a seamstress, a stained glass artist, all of whom helped pay the mortgage, and we had 4 rooms left over for teaching. These businesses had been there for quite some time, and my wife and I decided to let them stay as long as they wanted, which was maybe not the best business decision, but we felt it was being very fair to those tenants, and their presence also helped us as we built our business by taking some of the financial burden off us. Since most of us are solo guitarists, I need to emphasize something very important, which is, It is very difficult to do anything significant by yourself. Sure, you can be a great teacher, constantly developing your teaching skills and technique, and develop a large clientele that will keep you busy many hours every week and eventually be an important part of your income stream. But one of the things that has been the most fun for me has been to grow a teaching studio with teachers who I respect. We soon added a flute teacher with whom I played mostly local engagements, a voice teacher, a piano teacher, and continued to grow. There are a lot of decisions that have to be made when you take this step, including finding a facility, choosing a location you can afford and that people who can afford your services will want to visit weekly. You also have to check zoning, parking, and financing. How are you going to attract and retain teachers? What will your contracts with them include? Will they have keys to the facility? You have to decide on their employment status. Will they be employees or independent contractors? There are legal issues here. How will you advertise what you're doing? It's amazing to me that people still don't know about my store after 32 years having been here. There are lots of ways to do that. How are you going to deliver your product? Pay the bills, collect money, do the chores like cleaning, taking out the trash, cutting the grass. How are you going to obtain necessary supplies like music stands, method books for the students, pencils? Because of this commitment to quality teachers, our turnover in teaching staff is quite low. The quality of their work has earned McCutcheon Music the Best of Dayton Award for music instruction for the majority of years of its existence. I'll tell you a story. As a parent of a 6-year-old who wanted very much to learn martial arts, I looked around our region at different schools and settled on one which had a lot of trophies and a personable master. I remember watching all my son's classes and thinking, you know, this teacher does not know what a 6-year-old is. My son lost motivation, and in 3 months he was totally turned off to Taekwondo, never to return. That's when I realized that even well-intentioned parents cannot be experts in every area into which their children lead them. I also knew from personal experience that even though a music store may trumpet the brilliance of this or that teacher, these people are not necessarily there teaching because they're certified, degreed, experienced, or even necessarily adequate at their craft. I took guitar lessons for 7 years from someone the music store told me was the best classical guitar teacher in Dayton, only to suffer through a 4-year plateau throughout high school, which led me to become a college physics major. All those wasted years. So the first order of business when we opened our doors to other interested music teachers was the concept of quality. The challenge, of course, is to entice people of quality to commit to at least a day of teaching at your place when they could be teaching at other places, including their home, where they would pay no studio fees. How do you attract quality teachers? The main way is to convince them that your focus is indeed music education and not retail. Here's how we did it. First of all, we located in a nice suburb which was very positive in arts participation. Real estate was more expensive there, but the clientele and demand were there also. Next, we identified sources for these teachers. Part-time adjunct music faculty at colleges are always looking for extra income. Our Dayton Philharmonic is a busy but part-time orchestra, and those players are often looking for students as well. We saw that music stores in our area gave their teachers little more than closets in which to teach. Whisper rooms are well insulated for sound, but they are small and not what we wanted to do. Some of our rooms are 15 by 15, 2 are 20 by 30, and our smallest rooms are 8 by 10. We bought new upright pianos, painted and fixed up the rooms with musical art. We showed a great deal of respect to every potential teacher and let them know without a doubt that our main mission was music education. We devote 75% of our floor space to teaching studios. This is the opposite of the typical music store, which has 75% of its floor space devoted to merchandise. Potential teachers understood that our retail business existed mainly to support the success of our music teaching. They felt valued in a way which was new to them. We also offered our teachers a great deal of flexibility in the way they would conduct their business on our premises. For example, we allowed them to set their own hours and, more importantly, their rates. Many of our teachers take home more than the going rate of pay at the local colleges. We work very hard at matching the student with the right teacher, respecting our lesson customers by paying attention to their needs, as well as our teachers, who are also our customers. Think about that. We have a clear contract with our teachers. Each teacher gets a key to the teaching premises and may stay as late as they want to. We offer them free rehearsal space for recording and group projects. We give our teachers an extra discount and gift certificates for merchandise in the store, as well as referrals for gigs in the area. We also provide a receptionist who is on the teaching premises most of the hours that teachers are there, as well as a break area with free coffee, hot chocolate, a microwave, refrigerator, and Wi-Fi specifically for their use. An important aspect of teaching music is, of course, student performances. How many music stores who have a teaching staff actually hold regularly scheduled recitals? In my area, very few. Potential customers really want this option for themselves and their children. It is proof of learning accomplished, as well as a motivational element in the overall scheme of things. We host 2 studio-wide recitals each year at a local church with a nice piano and acoustics. In return for the use of the church, I occasionally play at their services. We hold 3 one-hour recitals spaced with a 30-minute time for a reception after each one, where I can personally congratulate the students and our participating teachers. We've always made it a point to be a positive part of our community, both in the local suburb where we located, as well as in the greater region of our city. We've met with success in some local competitions, and we eagerly participate in community events like the 4th of July Parade, where I perform patriotic and bluegrass songs with many of my guitar students. Great fun! As a teaching-only facility, we tried to work with local retail music stores to provide the materials that we needed for teaching, quality instruments in good adjustment, method books, etc. But we had a difficult time getting them to keep what we needed in stock, and that was hurting our teaching. So we began to do some retail ourselves in order to support our teaching. A Hallmark store in our area was going out of business, so we started displaying music and method books on some shelves that we bought at their going out of business sale. We also bought some slat wool from a children's palace in our area that went out of business, painted it, and hung it up on the walls to display some guitars. These purchases expose a grim reality of the retail trade. Businesses do fail. 20% of businesses fail during the first 2 years. 45% fail in 5 years. 65% fail in 10 years. And in 15 years, 75% of businesses are gone. They failed. We've been here 32, and I can unequivocally say that business is not easy, but it is possible. When you start to sell things, it turns out to be a very large step, because you need to have a vendor's license so that the state knows they can expect sales tax payments from you on a quarterly or monthly basis. You need to order and pay for inventory plus shipping costs. You need to keep track of that inventory. You need to sell it. You need to keep track of sales and bookkeeping and sales tax. You need to have some sort of security so that your inventory doesn't just walk out the door. You need somebody there? An employee? Remembering that it's very difficult to do anything really significant all by yourself. You have to have employees. When you do, you have to hire them. And there are things you need to know about the hiring process, like interviewing. What are you allowed to ask them? You have to check references and background checks. You have to assign tasks, get the right person for the right job. You have to schedule these things. You have to understand pay rates and incentives and benefits, payroll, workman's compensation, unemployment insurance. You have to have rules and decide what those are, dress code, what their social media presence is, and how that'll reflect on your business. There's a lot to this. Maybe a degree in business might not have been such a bad idea after all. 4 years into developing our teaching studio and retail store, my wife said that our younger son was pretty much on his own and needed less of her time, so she was interested in developing the retail end of our business. This was a large commitment on both our parts. The teaching studio had now grown to 7 rooms in that building, and we were running out of space. So we looked for other properties and considered purchasing a doctor's office on Main Street, which had a lot of nice rooms for teaching. It was $300,000, and I started sweating. Remember, this is the Midwest, not California. We have a much lower cost of living here in Ohio, and that's a lot of money. We kept looking and found a business condo for sale just off the main drag for half that price, about a mile away from our original location. It belonged to a guy who was a heating contractor and was nicely divided up into what we envisioned to be teaching studios. It had a large unfinished garage in the back, which we turned into 2 large rooms. We were the general contractors and got to learn a lot about building codes, occupancy certificates, electrical and fire inspections, and were hoping to develop a clientele which would fill classes. The heating contractor assured us that the present heater would be sufficient for the entire space, but we found out soon after that it did not meet code, and there went another $6,000. We built the larger rooms to the specs of a Yamaha piano school, which rented it for a year, then gave up and left. It generated a lot of traffic for the store, but was suddenly gone. So we started using the large rooms for other children's classes, which I team taught with another teacher. I had been teaching 1 day a week for many years at a Montessori school, general music to kids 3 to 9 years old, great fun. So I took some of that experience and brought that to the store. We also started guitar and ukulele classes for beginners. The new facility was not on the main thoroughfare, so we looked around for property on which we could possibly build another facility which would have more presence by virtue of its location. We considered seriously buying a $100,000 piece of undeveloped property, read dirt, on the main road through town and putting a $500,000 building on it, but decided that it would be much better to be able to sleep at night and not risk bankruptcy. Remember that slide we had on business failures? We continued to grow and filled up 10 more rooms with really good teachers. Then the condo in the building next to us across a driveway, but in the same group of buildings, came up for sale. This was not a layout I had ever experienced in any music store, but our plan was to open the retail store across the driveway from the teaching studio. We developed a band and orchestra instrument rental business and began interacting seriously with local public and private school music directors about how we could support their programs. An experienced instrument repair technician who fixed instruments for us liked us and decided to move his business to the condo that we had just purchased. Look at all that equipment. What a godsend for both of us. By the way, instrument repair is a viable and profitable career path. We kept adding condos and remodeling them, often done by me since I'm the cheapest contractor I know. Removing some walls from the front area, adding a doorway, dividing a room to make 2 more teaching studios, which were ideal for guitar. And we made that work for several years. 7 years ago, the final condominium in the building to our right came up for sale when the business owner finally retired. We now owned the entire building. Think Monopoly Hotels. And we opened another doorway into what is now our guitar room and my teaching studio. Finally, a large teaching room. Maybe I've made it now. Wait, no, I'm still teaching on Saturdays, and sometimes even on Sundays. Are we done yet? Not quite. This past year, the condos on our left came up for sale when that business owner retired. He offered it to us first because he really liked what we do. He had been a musician himself and really didn't mind 7 teaching studios on the opposite side of his walls with music from everything from piccolo to bass coming through. It also didn't hurt that he was going deaf. So, even though we weren't completely ready for another investment, we figured that if he sold it to someone else, it would be likely that the new owner would not be as sympathetic to little Johnny's saxophone blasting through the walls, and that no amount of sound insulation, at our expense of course, would stop the sound completely. So out of a sense of defense, we bought it on land contract. Another down payment. We are using the back area for storage of instruments, and the front has recently been completely gutted and remodeled, thanks to yours truly, who has become an expert drop ceiling hanger. As I wielded the paintbrush, which I have done on all our properties, and also replacing all the ceiling tiles, I kept thinking of how this activity was really in the service of music. It was also giving me a break from my work with guitar, which is pretty constant and consuming, as well as some physical exercise. I paid attention to details. There's a kind of pride you take when you work on a business that is yours. Now the original building has 7 teaching studios, and the new place has 14 more. We now have about 18 employees and over 50 teachers. We have a school representative, a sales staff, an ordering manager, a bookkeeper, and many more who make the store something we are proud of. We are helping over 70 people make a living while in the service of music. The joy of owning your own business is you can choose your own hours to work. Any 14 per day will do. Here's what my wife, the managing partner, does in a typical day. She works with the bookkeeper, participates in a 2-hour webinar, prepares Facebook posts, works with the bookkeeper, works with the buyer planning instrument purchases, answers email about warranty on ukuleles, deals with a trumpet rental customer whose grandson has not yet been scheduled for lessons, decides on a donation for jazz summer camp, works with carpet installers on a new area rug, researches and plans an interview for a prospective teacher, works with a condo association on planned parking lot repairs, plants flowers, has lunch? What's lunch? It takes advertising. Constantly educating the public about what you do and who you are. It's a good thing I'm a teacher. You have to decide who you want to reach and how much money and time you have to reach them, about special events, special workshops, and business showcase events. We've used print media, and for a couple of years, I wrote articles on children's music education for this regional newspaper. I host a radio show on our local classical FM station, and I've done this weekly for over 30 years. It gives me a chance to showcase my students, as well as the opportunity to affirm work by classical guitarists such as yourselves, and get your music out there on the radio. I do local appearances for kindergartners, elementary schools, even preschools, and educate the community in all these ways. We're always looking for events to either create or in which to participate. We're always in the 4th of July parade, and we host an open house on the parade route with my students playing patriotic and bluegrass music on their guitars. It's really a lot of fun. We host a Choose Your Instrument Day, which is free and open to the public and gives kids and parents a chance to learn who we are. If you own your own business, it's essential that you keep learning, especially product knowledge, which you can obtain at trade shows such as the National Association of Music Merchandisers. There are so many products out there. Which ones do you want for your store? This last one is a commode with a guitar-shaped toilet seat. Actually, we did not carry that at our store. You can learn from trade magazines and also seminars on all aspects of the music business, webinars, and you'll learn from all sorts of people, including your customers, private and public music teachers in your area, repairmen, and other store owners. There are business groups like the Chamber of Commerce and SCORE, made up of retired executives who help fledgling businesses make good decisions. The takeaways of this talk to this point are: it is safer to build a business one step at a time. Overextending your finances, especially in the music business, is probably not a healthy way to go. During the years since we opened in 1988, we have seen a number of music stores, both large and small, bite the dust. Even Guitar Center has had epic and continuing financial problems. If at all possible, buy your property. Always be saving for a down payment. How many down payments have I mentioned so far? When you rent, the landlord can raise the rent at any time as much as they want for no reason at all. Even though you'll have extra maintenance expenses, they're deductible and you will be building equity in your property. Over the years, you will come to own it. That has totally been worth it. If there are current tenants in a building you purchase, they can help with the mortgage and they cannot complain about your noise. Here are some ideas which, as Colin Powell titled his book, worked for me. Treat people the way you would want to be treated, even better than you would expect to be treated. Do not be afraid to give some things away. And I don't mean everything, but performances for charities, free noontime talks to civic groups, free field trip hosting for local preschools, volunteering for local arts councils, your time on the board of your local guitar society, producing a radio program on your local public radio station, producing and performing on a free Guitar Fest concert every year for the public. How about this? Contributing CD reviews to Soundboard. I do all of these things for free, which leads me to number 3. Establish as many connections as possible with as many people as you can in your community. Chambers of commerce, regional governments, newspaper columnists, restaurant owners. Something good will come of it. Good things will come to you from other people. Be on the lookout for newsworthy items. Help the media folks find something good to cover for a change. Finally, love what you do. Realize you are doing something special. See the worthiness of investing a life in music. You are lucky. A survey found that only 25% of Americans are genuinely happy with their careers. Sure, music has its challenges, but think about the benefits every morning when you get up. Remember, your brand equals your philosophy. You've got to have fun. You didn't know I could play the kazoo, did you? This guitar amplifier was taller than me. This is me having a good laugh with one of our school reps. We have a good time. So do the kids, and I love seeing that. I love teaching ukulele and showing kids the joys of music. The bigger picture, which you will see when you've been doing this special, creative, build-your-own career for 40 years or so, includes service to your peers. Have you done things for the musicians in your region, or even beyond? Service to your craft. Classical guitar has given you a lot, and you have absorbed energy and knowledge from many artists and teachers. What are you going to give back as you go through your career? Maybe establish a scholarship fund for guitarists at a university. Work to educate people who really need music in their lives but can't afford it. Is there something out there that excites you? What is your legacy going to be? How do you want to be remembered? I can only hope that you'll be able to enjoy having been a part of something bigger than yourself. Because as you look at retirement, and it's going to come, how will you feel about what you've done with your life? Because while you spend a lot of time figuring out how to earn a living, it comes down to your philosophy of living. At the end of it all, how are you going to feel about what you did? After all, this is your life. Spend it wisely. Getting back to Bunyan Webb's comment that I opened with. He was right. I'm not rich, monetarily. He wasn't either, and he was a great player, way better than me. But take a moment and look at his smile. He loved what he was doing, and I like to think I absorbed some of that energy. I could have made more money many other ways, but I have survived economically, raised 2 successful sons, and I'm guitar grandpa to 6 little ones. Being rich doesn't mean just money. Being rich means getting out of bed every morning and looking forward to what the day will bring. Creating something that was not there before. That's why we chose this crazy way to try and earn a living. And more than that, make a life. A worthwhile life. Who knows? You may get some interesting surprises, like 20 years after you teach a 6-year-old, they mention you in an article in Guitar Player magazine when they've just won the GFA, and later they become its president and later its artistic director. Or one of your students makes it big with a rock group and plays stadium concerts around the world, thanks to the left-hand technique you showed him as a kid that helped him win that audition. And maybe, just maybe, you'll get a sense that you know what you are doing with performing, teaching, or being a bright spot in the music business. Or just coming to understand and enjoy this wonderful, artful experience with the instrument held closest to the heart. Thanks for listening. I'm open for your questions.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the 2020 Guitar Foundation of America Question and Answer webinar series. This Q&A is a follow-up to a fabulous presentation by a familiar name who perhaps embodies the meaning of success in the classical guitar world, Jim McCutcheon. Jim, welcome to our program.
It's great to be here.
And really great. Yeah.
And I'm working on just getting everything set here, so you don't hear me twice.
Super. Yeah, well, you really laid it out for us. And before we begin, I want to remind all those listening that the real important thing is we really want to entice you to submit your questions, because I know, as a guitarist, as Jim does, how difficult a profession this is and how important these pearls of wisdom that he's trying to get across to us are for our profession. So don't be shy. Put those questions into that chat space, and we'll get to those questions very shortly here. So anyway, Jim, I'm going to take a look at some of these questions, if you don't mind, and see what rises to the top.
Okay.
So one of the ones that seems to be rising to the top right away, here's a question.
from a familiar Chuck Houlihan as one of the people asking this question, how much of this practical knowledge do you feel is being taught in college programs, and how much should be required? He says, I found it to be entirely lacking and avoided, and as it in reality may scare off enrollment. What do you say to that?
Well, if just becoming a music major hasn't scared off students and their parents, I think if that hasn't happened already, it's going to be hard to scare them anymore. I know there are many, I don't know every college program, of course, but I know at the University of Dayton, we have 3 days of professional development every week for every music major. And the one that I'm in has a number of days devoted to this kind of information. And it's just it's one of my favorite classes to teach. It probably because of my experience, I'm bringing a lot of this to those classes. I think until you've kind of been through this, it's kind of hard to know what is what's required to earn a living. All these different ways you can earn a living, and the do's and don'ts. I think one of the resources that college teachers can use are people who are in the business whom they respect, and bring them to your campus and just have them do a seminar, or even just a couple-hour lecture or something like that. But to bring these people with business experience to their campus. Some colleges have music business degrees. They've already got this kind of covered. But most colleges don't have that, I don't think.
Right. Yeah, it's a great answer. I do know that in my pedagogy seminar that's coming up in the fall, I incorporate a lot of business savvy into my presentation for my students, because I feel it's really my responsibility. But to have a class 3 days a week like that, that's really that's the golden egg right there that you're talking about.
Yeah, that class is not just in business and that, but it's a whole palette of music kind of related things that you don't get in theory or sight singing or history.
Yeah, and I do see a
practical.
Trend. Yeah, and I do see a trend in colleges moving that direction. So hopefully that will continue to happen, I think.
Yeah.
So we have another great question here. What advice do you have for studio teachers in the age of remote instruction?
Yeah, I'd say develop your chops, and also your marketing. I mean, take a look at Edward Flower's website. That would be a good one to check out. He's doing a lot of that kind of stuff, and I think this whole pandemic has really gotten a lot of teachers to develop their skills in this area, and I think it's gonna hold on. I know here at the store we have 50 teachers, and almost all of them switched to online.
Yep.
And now it's starting to come back a little bit. Everybody's being really careful, and about maybe a third of our students are back to face-to-face, but the rest are hanging on for as long as they're comfortable. And our teachers are comfortable teaching that way. And if we have some teachers who just don't want to come back yet, and that makes sense, and for them. So, it's going to be an interesting thing. But I think the whole skill set of just knowing what is Zoom or Google Hang, or those all the different methods of delivery. And then it's very interesting because almost every week you see some new company coming into existence that has something similar. So there's just a lot of different platforms to come to understand, and that would it's not a bad thing to have, and have your chops set up technically so you understand what you have to do with your lighting, and just with how you deliver yourself into the camera if you're trying to show this hand technique or this hand technique. Just how are you going to use that to your advantage?
Well, that's a great way to put it. I never thought of building chops in that area, being a guitarist. We've got another great question that's somewhat related. Can you talk a little bit about your methodology for teaching kids, inspiration, books, etc.?
Oh yeah. They're out of reach right now, but there are a lot of different ways you can go, and the Suzuki people have done a lot with guitar. That's a pretty organized thing. I'm more of a fluid kind of teacher. I like a lot of Suzuki tenets like rote learning,
Yeah.
um, and parental involvement. I think a lot of those tenets are just right on the mark. I tend to be a little more fluid with my students who are little. I like to get them singing right away, playing a G chord and just singing with it. Getting past that benchmark. If they're little kids, there's a music education benchmark where they can keep a steady rhythm while they sing a more complicated rhythm, that kind of thing. And I like to get them singing and getting things that they can actually perform right from the get-go.
Yep.
And if they can't match pitch, well, I love to help them match pitch. It's one of the things I really like to zero in on, and kids are so flexible up here. They just most kids. Some kids I have to humor to get them to sing, but I love to get them to sing. My principal teacher, Bunyan Webb, would sing while he practiced, and he let me watch him do it. And he didn't have a very good voice, and so I said, "So what are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm feeling the phrase in my body and feeling how that goes." And it's also so easy to improvise so many aspects of music making with your voice, like dynamics or phrasing, rubato. You can do that with your voice, and just you can do that so easily that if you can just get it in that way of producing whatever kind of interpretation you're going to come up with, you can put that onto the guitar. He taught me that.
That's great. I want to mention it in that great talk that you gave earlier. You mentioned the ukulele, and I gotta say for myself that I've heard many music education specialists really sing the praises of, there you go, playing the ukulele.
You could play a ukulele, ukulele, lele. You could play a ukulele too. Was the first instrument I played when I was 8. A great
Excellent.
Gateway instrument.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great way to approach it. And I know the people that are submitting these questions are getting a lot of that answered. There's here's an interesting question. When did you suggest, or do you suggest guitar students start looking for jobs at teaching studios, and what type of interview should they expect from stores like yours?
Oh, that's a great question, because there are so many answers. I think they should start getting experience as soon as they can. I think it's good to get input. I think there are a lot of stores that if you can play G, C, and maybe D seventh, they'll hire you as a teacher. Our store has a little bit more strict requirements. We ask that they have either professional training like a degree or a lot of performing experience, and at least a year of teaching. Because that first year of teaching, you're going to learn a lot. Like I said in the talk, I learned more than my students that year. And so I would say just start getting experience whenever you can. Just the fact that you're in college, I think, is giving you an advantage over people who haven't. If somebody comes in to the store and they've played some, and we interview them, that's one level. But if they've got a degree, that says something to us. Even a bachelor's degree really says something to us that they've hung in there that long. Now, whether they've had any training and teaching or what they actually learned in that degree, or how, there are a lot of variables there. But to get in and just do interviews and see what's out there. There's a lot of studios, a lot of small studios that start up like we did, and there are a lot of opportunities to actually do that. If you've got a degree, then you're a desirable entity to go after one of those jobs.
Yeah, that's a terrific answer. There's a question here about a method book. Is there an actual method book that you wrote? And is that book available?
That's really nice. I actually have written a couple method books because it's like everybody. We have our own set of priorities, the things that we kind of distill down and think this is what's important for somebody to know. This is what would have really helped me. So I wrote one book called Blues for Beginning Guitarists, where you learn lots of technique playing the pentatonic scale and the 12-bar blues, and I use that with my beginning college and high school kids. It's fun because it also gets some improvising. I like to get them improvising some. And then I wrote one for little kids called The Very Young Guitarist. It's on my website, and it's part singing and just real simple chords, but singing songs. When I use it in a class, you can play games with these songs with kids interacting. They like physical things. They sit there for 20 minutes and you want to get them up and moving and doing something. And so we get them doing that with some of the games that are related to the songs that I teach. That's The Very Young Guitarist, and that's pretty fun. And then we just learn a bunch of tunes, single note tunes.
Well, that's great to know. You certainly got a sale on my end of it. I'll be looking for that book on your website. Now, here's a little more complicated question. Based on your model, it appears that your teachers are contractors. Have you looked at the possibility of making them employees with taxes withheld? What are the advantages and disadvantages for the business and the teachers?
Well, that is a very pertinent question. When teachers are independent contractors, it lightens our load on the administrative end because they're responsible for collecting money from the students. We have a system in place where we are able to monitor lessons and how many lessons they've given and all that, but they're all responsible for collecting money from the clients and then turning around paying us the studio fee. Because they're independent contractors, we are legally not allowed to tell them what to charge, and we're I'm trying to think of what those other restrictions are, but you basically you can't tell them what methods to use or anything like that. You got to just really make sure they're independent. Now, the interesting thing that we've learned is that many stores do those things anyway with their teachers as independent contractors, and it doesn't sound like exactly the letter of the law, but nothing seems to happen.
Wow.
So the advantage of having them as employees are, I guess the disadvantage is you really have to have your bookkeeping together and have somebody on top of all that, and you have to do payroll checks for them, which you have to take out state tax, local tax, federal tax, and all the rest of them. And you have a lot of that to do.
Wow.
I think one of the things that I think has really worked for us in having them as independent contractors I just think it's worked for us because they like the freedom of the way we kind of keep our hands off and let them do what they do best. And they have a lot of flexibility in things. They can set their own rates and their own hours. And I think what proves that this works is that our turnover in teachers is really, really slow. Hardly anybody leaves.
Right.
And there are lots of other places in our area. We're a mid-size Midwestern city. Lots of other places they could go and teach, and they don't. And so I think the fact that it's working has we've just decided not to change that status.
Right. Well, I'm sure that you being in charge of everything makes people feel like they really want to keep that job as well, because you really know what you're doing. It's
Thank you.
Really feather in your cap for all the incredible experience you have. We have so many great questions.
Hello, everyone. This is Ryan Ayers, and I'm the executive producer of the 2020 virtual convention. Thank you so much for joining us today and for all of your comments and for joining in on the Zoom question and answer sessions and for building this community of guitar here on the web. We really appreciate all of you. So we have another full day of content tomorrow. We're starting with a technique workshop with Luigi Attademo. We then have our general manager, Connie Hsu, is hosting a conversation on racial disparity and inequity in classical guitar with guests Thomas Flippen, Christopher Mallett, Judicael Perrois, and Ciyadh Wells. We also have the second masterclass from the great Eduardo Fernandez, a lecture and follow-up question and answer session with Jamie Monk on Rockberg's Caprice Variations, and that's in conversation with Elliot Fisk, so that's going to be quite a treat. And then we're going to finally have, this is all in block 1, by the way, and we're going to end block 1 with a performance from Michael Partington. This is going to conclude today's block 2 coverage. Block 3 is going to be coming up just in a few minutes. It will be a fresh stream, so go ahead and refresh your browsers, refresh your Facebooks, refresh that YouTube, because we're going to be bringing you an entire block of our International Concert Artist Competition, the ICAC. We have 8 competitors in the preliminary round for you tonight, and we hope you enjoy. As we've been ending every block for our stream, and as we will for the rest of the week, we like to bring in our mystery performer and have them play Lagrima. And tonight, our mystery performer is Yufei Yang, and here she performs Lagrima.